My name is Shannon Warren. I'm the founder and CEO of Matrix Labor Leasing. I just wanted to welcome you all to our very first webinar under the GitGat Matrix Workforce Services Limited, our joint venture with GitGat, engaging with Indigenous communities. I wanted to, before I get into introductions though, I want to talk about some Zoom etiquette notes. So if everyone on here can please stay muted while we're doing our presentation to everyone. And then also at the end, we can unmute for Q&A. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And loving this, how we communicate now under the COVID circumstances where we can all Zoom and communicate and stay in touch. Before I get into the introductions, I wanted to...
Can't hear with all that talk.
Sorry? I wanted to say a big thank you to our partner and marketing team that we've been using for over a decade, Style Labs. A big thank you to you guys. And also I want to say thank you to my amazing team here at Matrix. We started this idea back in December of last year. Everyone put a lot of time and energy into this webinar today. So I want to thank Claudia, Shaista, Mike, Nadeem, and Azul for your passion and dedication. Very proud moment. Thank you. I also want to thank everyone for joining us today. We are very grateful and humbled at the overwhelming response. We believe that success comes through like-minded people coming together to share knowledge, and hopefully this is the first of many opportunities we will have to come together, both virtually and in person. We'd also like to thank you for your patience. We understand that several of you have received multiple notifications from our scheduling system, Calendly, and appreciate that calls and feedback. Please accept our apologies for any inconvenience that this may have caused you all. I'd also like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 7 territory. The traditional territories of the Blackfoot Nations, including Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai, Tsuut'ina Nation, and also the Stoney Nakoda First Nations. We acknowledge all many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. Engaging, training, and retaining Indigenous workforce is one of the top priorities for most organizations across Canada. It is relevant in the current in the current environment to develop and retain the strong and ever-growing workforce. Keeping in mind, we have organized this webinar to educate representatives from various organizations, such as yourselves, to help you develop strategic and effective outreach methods in order to facilitate collaboration with Indigenous communities. I have a privilege and an honor to introduce you all to the set of speakers for today's webinar. Paul Patterson, who is the CEO of GitGat Development Corporation, and also has worked for over 20 years with Indigenous groups across Canada, and Cameron Hill, one of the elected leaders of GitGat Nation, and also our joint venture partner. Please, everyone, welcome Paul and Cameron. Thank you.
I don't see a list of the attendees, but we had planned on Cam going first. So Cam, if you're there. All right, we'll go to plan B. Cam Hill, who would have been speaking first, is a counselor for GitGat Nation and a member of the GitGat Nation, which I cannot claim to be either of those two things. Shannon is correct. I've worked in the Indigenous space as a white middle-class North American male for about 25 years. I live in the traditional territories, the Cowichan First Nation and group of nations, their unceded territory. And I work in the unceded territory, the Tsimshian Nations, either in Prince Rupert or Kitimat Terrace, and up until COVID hit, 10 days out of every month in Hartley Bay. I think it's possible to overcomplicate this question of relationships between people, and I'm going to step away from the cultural attributes that sometimes complicate things for people, and legitimately so. Not that anybody's actually asked, and I don't think my agenda item is give advice to people, but I'll fire off a quick one-liner on this, which is act naturally. for people who in business, I think you can all attest to the better quality of results you get in your other relationships by behaving in ways that are respectful and honest, fair play, equitable. Those are all good attributes for any relationship. The same holds true for every single Indigenous person I've ever worked with or spent time with, either as a friend or as a colleague or as a business partner. The tendency to assume that there's going to be more that separates people rather than join them, I think troubles early contact between people. And again, this is regardless of culture. If it's another identity that you're meeting with, then we tend to be careful, and I think that's probably the right way to go. But I would suggest to folks here on this line, many of you who have First Nations partners already, or are working with, or are employed by First Nations, understand this to be true, that there is much more that draws you together. And it's around the simple attributes of living a life that you like. Cam would have spoken to you, I think, about the traditional governance of GitGat that's specific to them, but not specific to everybody. They have an active hereditary system. They have an elected government. The two systems of government have a protocol that was drafted by them several years ago to make clear the ways in which those two different kinds of jurisdictions extend across the territory. And the result is that GitGat is a competent, well-managed, values-driven First Nation that has been my distinct pleasure to work with for the last 5-6 years. I guess we're at 6 years now. I represent kind of the more public engagement with the business world, so I don't have a role in any way, shape, or form in the governance of the community. I serve at the pleasure of the community and its membership, and I have a pretty clear mandate that's shaped and directed by economic development. In 2017, when I took over the Development Corporation, I took that mandate and ran hard, partly because LNG Canada was coming down the pipeline. And there were a lot of relationships that we felt were necessary and central to the early growth of the Development Corporation. So most of the engagement on that level has been with my face and my words, but I have often called on Chief and Council to come into discussions and to shape those in ways that is specific to their needs. Because as I admitted at the front end, it's not my place to speak for the nation. I work for the nation. I'm not their voice and I'm not their face. Having said that, what makes working with GitGat as positive an experience for me is that there's a pretty thorough alignment of values. And so if I was to provide any other direction to people or any other suggestions around early engagement or engagement they're already in with Indigenous peoples, it would be to spend time thinking about your values, spend time thinking about the values of the people you work with, recognize the value and strength in an alignment between those things, and realize it's not a matter of contention. You can't kind of go into an argument with people about their values. You listen, you accept, and you work together, period. We have a number of business lines. We've got a forestry company. We have a marine fuel station. We've got a commercial building in Prince Rupert. We've got 16 different joint venture partnerships. We're very active on the LNG Canada site and working hard to be active across the region. At no point have I received the advice from Cam or any other elected or hereditary leaders with GitGat to build something that is an isolate from the regional economy. This is very much full engagement with the region, with its project work, with its people, because they are part of that, and to suggest that you could act or be effective otherwise is a silly notion. So the other place that kind of give you some advice on, to the extent that you haven't asked me for it, is to kind of look carefully at how long you plan on being in the neighborhood. Entry to any neighborhood is critical, and so paying attention to that is critical. How you first engage and your openness to what might be new for you, and your willingness to shape your kind of relationship on that basis. I've just found out that Cam's here. I can now see him on screen, so I'm going to turn over the microphone to you, Cam.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Sorry about that, everybody. Number one, just to give you a little bit of a history of myself, I'm a GitGat member that's been born and raised in Hartley Bay. I went away for school. At the time that I left high school here, it was only up until grade 10, and I had to go to Prince Rupert to finish my high school education, which was a complete and utter burden, probably 2 of the worst years of my life, being uprooted from a place that I love. But in saying that, I knew that I needed to make it back home because that's where I wanted to be. So I continued on my course of becoming a teacher, and eventually am a principal of the Hartley Bay School. And I'm juggling at this moment a math pre-calculus class, along with having this call with all of you. So I think that, as I heard earlier, we're going to have some time for questions, and I really welcome the questions. But I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank everybody that's here, and to let all of you know that the GitGat Nation and our elected leadership, and also our hereditary leadership, are very much looking forward to walking hand in hand with our new partners that we are forming. And especially Matrix, as we move down a path together. The GitGat Nation is comprised of approximately 1,000 people that you may find is hard to believe, but actually live in all 4 corners of the earth. We have people everywhere, even though we're such a small nation. But living in our community right now, we have about approximately 150 people. In the spring and summer months, and also into the fall, because our community is so dependent on harvesting. Since the beginning of time immemorial, we've harvested off of the land and the water, and we continue to do so. And a lot of our people really depend on the resources that we have around us, and they come home on a regular basis and partake in that at various times throughout the year. Our school is comprised of 32 students this year, and that goes from kindergarten up until grade 12. I'm going to talk quite fast here because I know our time is limited. We have the way that we're able to do our education system within our community here is that we're closely affiliated with FNESC and FNSA, who bring us the ability to have a lot of online courses in which we are privy to some of the best teachers within the province of BC in regards to the higher, what I would call the higher academic courses that we're able to deliver to our students. Case in point, when I went to school here, I never would have even entertained the thought of taking Physics 11. I've got 2 students in grade 11 that have their teacher right now has asked them to, if she offered the Physics 12 course next year, would they be able to take it? So I think that in itself is so it shows the success of what we're trying to get to our students living in such an isolated area here. And coupled with that, I kind of do. Once you get to know me, you'll understand that I kind of march to my own drum. I know what my goals are. I know what I need to do to attain them. And just to show that point, my 2 grade 10 students that I have for this year, have already got 3 grade 11 sciences under their belt heading into their grade 11 year, which we're very happy about, and preparing them for whatever the needs may be for them to further their education outside of Hartley Bay. I don't know. I'm a hereditary speaker for our hereditary chief, Wamodam. Our hereditary system is of a matrilineal society. We follow our mother, I don't know too much else to say. I think that in a learning platform such as this, I think that with the amount of participants that we have, I really look forward to entertaining questions, because I don't want to babble on about things that will be important to me, but might not be so important to other people. And I know that there's probably some questions that people would want to ask. And as I tell my students, there really is no silly question. Gaining an understanding of anything in this world needs questions, and to become critical thinkers, and to be really understanding of what's happening in the world around us, we need to be able to ask those questions. So when the time permits, I really welcome any questions about my community, and I'd be happy to answer them to the best of my ability. The other thing that I would say is that Hartley Bay, for me growing up here, much like many of my peers, I grew up in a primarily commercial fishing industry. That's how I put myself through university, as did my father before me. And with the downturn of the fishing industry, our community took a really hard hit. It was a very good life to be able to basically work the springs and summers, and to be able to make enough money to upkeep your boat, to be able to get out on the water and just live the life that Gitga'at people have lived for thousands of years. The community that I live in right now, in Hartley Bay, is in excess of 150 years just with this community. But like I said, we've been occupying this territory for thousands of years. We have 7 Tsimshian neighbors. We have people and communities living all around us. We share, there is some common territory that we all share. And obviously there's some territory that is only Gitga'at owned. Through years and years of living beside one another, we understand and we know how the sharing works, and we've been able to live like that for a very long time and be able to sustain ourselves. I think the way that I would end off, and I think that many Gitga'at people live this way and understand this way, and it's always foremost in our decisions. What are we doing that is going to impact our environment? What are we doing that is going to impact our future generations? If we are going to be detrimental or negative in any of those decisions that we are going to make, I could pretty much guarantee you that the Gitga'at Nation will fight to make sure that our norms, beliefs, and values as a people are always going to be upheld. The area that we are fortunate enough to live on will always be put forth and be looked after, and it will always be first. And my grandmother had a very simple saying for me as I grew up, and I use it wherever I go, and I use it in my day-to-day life in whatever I'm doing. And basically, it's just as simple as this. She said to me, "You take what you need and you use what you take." And I think that if the rest of the world would follow in what my grandmother's teachings are, we would be in a far better place. And those words resonate with not only Gitgat people, but all of our neighbors all up and down the coast. We're all in this together, and we want to provide for our future. So in having said that, I don't really know what my time limit is here. It's a pleasure to be on here, and I look forward to any questions that may come our way. And again, thank you for taking the time to listen to me.
Thank you, Paul and Cameron, for your valuable insights. We're going to move on to our next speaker, Billy Fortier, who's an associate at MLK Aikens, experience in advising clients across a number of industries to establish joint ventures and other business relationships with First Nations and Métis communities. Please welcome Billy Fortier.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much to Matrix and to Gitgat Nations to inviting me to chat with you today. If you have any concerns, if you can't hear me, please, by all means, raise your hand, or if you have any questions, please pop in. I know we have questions at the end as well, or if anything comes up later that you want to email me about, I welcome your comments. I am speaking to you today from Treaty 7 territory, but my family is from Fort McKay in northern Alberta. We are in Treaty 8 territory, so I'm a mixed of Cree, Dene, and Métis background. I am an Indigenous lawyer, as the introduction said, and I work with Métis and First Nation communities and their businesses across Canada. As also in the introduction, so my type of work, I'm a corporate commercial lawyer, an Aboriginal law lawyer. So I work on various economic development initiatives. This will involve setting up businesses on and off reserve, setting up partnerships with Indigenous owned businesses and industry, all types of industry, and various mergers and acquisitions in general, corporate commercial law. So I know my topic is, quite large, and honestly, I think we could take a few days to cover this topic, and I have about 10, 15 minutes. So I'll just kind of crack right into it and try to give as much background about my personal experiences and tips that I can through my experience with working with First Nations and Métis communities. I'd firstly just say that my experience, how I have been involved from a legal perspective in engaging in the Indigenous workforce and Indigenous communities and their businesses is obviously, from the legal point of view, is through agreements. So I'm sure as a lot of you on the phone and in the group today know, you've probably seen, various agreements, maybe a relationship agreement, an MOU, an impact benefit agreement, at various limited partnership agreements, joint venture agreements, etc. I'm sure most people in the call are familiar with this. So as legal counsel to a First Nation owned business or a Métis owned business, I'm often involved in drafting these types of agreements, and will often be asked by my clients to ensure that there is some sort of contracting provisions in there, employment provisions in there, or training provisions in there, or all three, or some mix of the three. So these kind of provisions will ensure that there is some kind of commitment from the company or the industry that we are partnering with, or the nation or the Métis community is partnering with, that there'll be a commitment to the community that we will engage your workforce, we will train your workforce, we will give preference to your contractors and to your nation-owned businesses and your member-owned businesses, etc. And with all due respect, I'd like to see more than just best efforts. I would like to see wording of, firm commitments and preferential bidding processes, etc. Of course, we understand this is, the businesses are competitive in nature, and the companies have to, perhaps meet certain qualifications, obviously, to be part of the bidding process. But we ensure that these kind of provisions are right within the agreements. So that's kind of just a little bit of background on what I would do as legal counsel to enforce and promote engagement of Indigenous companies and businesses. I would like to maybe talk just personally about my experience with working with Indigenous communities. We work with communities across Canada, and so I just want to reiterate, even though I'm an Indigenous lawyer myself, and I work, let's say, a lot in Blackfoot territory. I'm not going to go into Blackfoot territory. I'm not Blackfoot and pretend I know everything about Blackfoot people. I go in there and I research the community. I try to have as much respect as I can for their cultures and norms or ways of knowing, for their legal structures, their culture, or the cultural norms, their language, etc. So that's something that I would really reiterate on the phone call today. I would remind everybody, just kind of quickly quote the TRC call to action number 92, which says that we call upon the corporate sector in Canada to adopt United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as a reconciliation framework and to apply its principles, norms, and standards to corporate policy and core operational activities involving Indigenous peoples and their lands and resources. So what's exciting today is I think that this is kind of part of that process. And so I'm really excited that there are so many people on the phone today who are clearly making such a commitment to the TRC and to this call to action in particular. I would just remind everybody, and Paul and the councillor already, spoke to this a little bit this morning, but they're just a reminder of just the diversity of First Nations MAT communities across Canada, and just a reminder that what worked with one community won't necessarily work for another community. You might have experience working with folks on the West Coast, but don't think that's going to work working with Anishinaabe people in Ontario, for example. There's 630 First Nations in Canada. There is approximately 50 languages. The Métis community is booming. There's about 600,000 Métis. As we know, and I'm sure everybody on the phone knows today, we are a very young population. The median age in Canada is generally around 40 years old, and the Indigenous population, the median age is 30 years old. So a huge gap, 10-year gap. So a very young and growing population. So there's lots of tips I can go through, but I'm going to try to keep it short and just touch on a couple of them. But I think that do your research before you go into the community. Find out who the culture of the community, what nation it is, their history, their language, their interactions with their neighbors, their land base, their leadership. As Paul said, is it hereditary or is it under the Indian Act? These are all things that I would recommend doing before you walk into a community. It's all about relationship building. I've been working with some nations for over 6-7 years. It takes time to build those relationships. I think sometimes in the corporate world we rush in and we think that we need to get things done right away, but we have to be reminded that decision making takes time. And sometimes the corporate world can look kind of aggressive with its timelines, and that's not how it works with First Nations. We need time. We need to build that relationship, build that trust. This is just a small matter, but think about your body language. Handshakes are not a traditional way of greeting in a lot of nations. And so a lot of times in corporate America, you think of the boardroom, go in with a firm handshake and grab that person's hand and show that confidence. That's seen as quite aggressive to a lot of people, especially an elder. Don't shake an elder's hand really hard. We have to be gentle. People will sometimes look at a lot of First Nations people and youth. A lot of times they'll keep their eyes down, and you'll come across maybe as they're not listening. But this is a shyness. Humility is a traditional teaching in our communities, and so that can sometimes be misinterpreted as somebody maybe not engaging or not paying attention. Be careful about giving gifts or honoraria. There was a story of a company, I won't give a name, but they went into the Fort Chip community and they gave the gift of knives to the members and to the elders because they thought, oh, you're hunter and trappers, this would be a really great, appropriate gift. But in their culture, to give a knife is to symbolize the cutting off of a relationship. And so obviously that was not the intention of the gesture. But that's just another example of just, doing that research. Talk to the elders. I fully recommend talk to the elders, engage with the elders. They are the knowledge keepers of that community, and they will tell you what is appropriate for their community. Another example is blankets. In Blackfoot territory, it is welcome to give, blankets as a gift. It's a show of covering, of provision. But the East Coast First Nation, they battled germ warfare, and that was often brought through blankets. So if you gave a blanket to a nation on Eastern Canada, that would be possibly very offensive to the recipient. So again, just doing your research on the nation. There's so much more to talk about, and we don't have time. I'm sorry. There's so many tips. You might go into a community, be sensitive about ceremony, about prayers, about opening prayers. Who's going to do that? Don't automatically assume like some people will pray. They might pray in their language, or they might have their own native spirituality or Christian religion. So don't automatically assume. Again, just to find out from the elders. And there's humor. I just there's so much humor in First Nations. I think we can't be so hard on ourselves. I'm sure I've made mistakes, and so just be gentle on yourself. If you make a mistake, be gentle and just move forward. I think that humor and laughter, I think, is such a beautiful trait we have in our communities, and a lot of times we can just laugh it off and kind of move on with our relationship. I would say, personally, I think I've got about a few minutes left here. I think I would just give a couple examples just from our firm personally and our experience from trying to retain and engage Indigenous students and Indigenous lawyers. Just to kind of give, more of a personal example, we also have actually really struggled to retain Indigenous students and Indigenous lawyers in our firm. We have, quite a huge presence in our Indigenous practice group. And as we said, we work with nations and Métis communities and companies across Canada. But it bothers me as an Indigenous lawyer to not see more Indigenous lawyers in our practice area and in our firm. And just to give some examples of just kind of maybe some of the barriers and just kind of the things that we have faced and just some things to be cognizant of. I'll give an example. I volunteered with a program that we went into schools, junior highs, and engaged with junior high Indigenous students and taught them certain legal concepts. And as part of that, also, we went on to the reserve schools. And then at one point, we brought the students into Calgary and brought them to the law school and toured them around. And just, I was quite, I think I should have been surprised, but, you have to be reminded some of these students had never even, A, been to a huge city center, and B, had never even been to a university. And so that, sometimes there's such a gap between the expectations of those students. So you're wanting there's so much, youth and a huge growing population. So my recommendation is try to engage youth early, get into the schools early, engage them, have youth programs, have mentorship programs, and try whatever industry all of you folks on the phone today are from, whether it be hospitality, oil and gas, engineering, law. Try to engage the youth as early as we can and provide that support, that mentorship, that information to really kind of get them thinking about their future careers. Because as we all know on the call today, why I think we're here is because this is a huge potential workforce for all of you. We need to really try to create systems, I think, for inclusion for Indigenous employees. We have to be mindful, when I think of it, some Indigenous students that are summering or articling with us, or Indigenous lawyers, things will come up sometimes in their home communities, like an illness, a death in the family. Well, they are going home for that funeral. Like the community grieves together and they're going to leave. And sometimes when you're a law firm, like an aggressive, environment, like where did they go? Why are they leaving? Why are they taking days off? We have to be sensitive of that, those cultural norms or those cultural barriers. Take a holistic approach when you're working with Indigenous people. It's not laziness or a lack of work ethic. There's just certain maybe barriers to their success, and they need to have that support. So just taking a holistic approach, and I don't want to end on a negative note, but obviously there's health issues, mental health issues, cultural barriers. That we have to just really understand and have a sensitivity to, and to support these employees to ensure that they can have long-term success. So those are some of the lessons that we've had to learn as well at our firm, because we really want to increase our our Indigenous workforce as well. So, but leaving on a positive note, again, I think look to the youth. I'm so excited for our youth and the next generation. Just this incredible force that I'm hoping that they will be for their communities and for Canadian society. So thanks everyone so much. I think my time is up. Happy to take questions at the end. And of course, if you want to email me afterwards, I'm happy to take any emails as well. So thanks everyone.
Thank you so much for sharing that valuable knowledge with us and things to definitely consider when engaging with Indigenous communities. I would like now to introduce our final set of speakers for this webinar, Rebecca Cragans, who is an Indigenous Business Relations Manager at Bird Construction, possesses a passion for Indigenous relations, and has more than 25 years of experience in the construction industry, as well as Evie Nance, who is the Employment and Training Manager at Gitxaala Nation, focused on developing training programs for Indigenous people. Please welcome Rebecca and Evie.
Good morning, everybody. Before we begin our presentation, we would like to acknowledge that the Gitxaala community have been the stewards of the unceded ancestral territory of the Tsimshian people and have inhabited the lands and waters of the Pacific Northwest since time immemorial. As I was introduced, my name is Rebecca Cragans. I'm the Indigenous Business Relations Manager for Bird Construction. I'd like to thank Gitxaala and Matrix Labor Leasing for inviting us to share the Gitxaala Nation Bird Introduction to Carpentry program story today. I'm joining the call from Treaty 6 territory in the Edmonton region. I am also from Treaty 8 territory. I grew up in Fort McMurray, and I grew up in a community that had a lot of industry involvement. So I feel like it's so important for Indigenous communities to have who are impacted by the industry around them to have meaningful participation. So thank you for having us, and I'll pass it off to Evie to introduce the Gitxaala community and the Continuous Learning Center.
Hello, everyone. My name is Evie. I'm the Employment and Training Manager with Gitxaala. I would like to acknowledge that I'm presenting today from lovely, rainy Prince Rupert and Tsimshian territory. I would like to acknowledge the matriarchs and elders. Thank you to Gitxaala and Matrix for the invitation to speak today. Can we begin the slide, please? Actually, can we go to the next slide? Sorry. So Rebecca and I are basically speaking to our perspective of actually entering into some meaningful collaboration and how this worked for Gitxaala and for Bird Construction. So when I first began working with a new union or a new industry partner, this is where I begin. Where is Gitxaala Nation? And this is so fundamental. And I imagine it's the same thing with Hartley Bay, that they're experiencing the same issues when they're dealing with unions and industry. And I'm going to be doing the same thing after I get off this call. I'm going to be talking with an industry partner and explaining where we are and the challenges that's faced, even to go for a drug and alcohol test, or what it means to go into work, because we are in a distant, isolated community, and there are challenges that may not be experienced by population in a larger center. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this is where I work out of, is Prince Rupert. We've got a beautiful picture there as well. We are located in the Cedar Longhouse of the Museum of Northern British Columbia. And we help members by liaising with industry. And so that might mean a lot of advocating, and it also means a lot of partnership and collaboration. Next slide, please.
So Bird Construction is a large general contractor who has been in the construction industry for over 100 years across Canada. Last year on September 25th, we joined forces with Stuart Olson. So we are a much larger company now, and that presents a lot more opportunities for us to work with Indigenous communities across Canada. We presently have 4 parcels of work at the LNG Canada project in Kitimat, and my role is to engage, find synergies for meaningful employment and participation with the Indigenous communities in the region. Back to you, Evie, to provide an overview of the Introduction to Carpentry program.
So what we did when we began our joint venture with BIRD is we created a program, and what was really different about this is it wasn't communicating, say, with a normal academic institution where, you know, Rebecca and I sat down and she came to us and she said, what works for your nation? What is going to work for the Kikatla Nation? And so after having, you know, multiple conversations about what was important and what would work, we designed this training program. So it's called the Introduction to Carpentry program. It's 8 weeks. So we started with 4 weeks of essential skills to make sure that our members had the math skills that were required to do the trade. And then followed by 4 weeks of practical carpentry training that was led by the BCRCC Union, or the Carpenters Union. Some people may know them across Canada. And what was really great about working with the Carpenters Union is that they were able to work with BIRD Construction to find out what exactly was needed that they needed to know when they were actually going to go to work on site. So the training was very specific, but also to work with the ITA, the training authority, to make sure that we were meeting all those requirements. And so we had that collaboration between the government arm of the ITA, the industry partners, so that when they finished this, it actually led to employment opportunities after, and with the Carpenters Union. So this included, 10 participants graduated, 10 participants are now employed from the first cohort, 40% female participation, which was very, very important for us, and we still maintain that in our second cohort, which just finished last Friday, and of course, a female instructor. Next slide, please.
So to speak about the joint venture partnership that Kikatla and BIRD agreed upon, I believe this was the ultimate foundation for both parties to collaborate well. We ensured that we spoke with the community before we went into this partnership and looked into the Introduction to Carpentry program. We understood the employment and training plan from the community, and we really wanted to support their vision to be thriving, healthy, and employed. Evie and I actually started working on the terms of reference well before the joint venture was signed in preparation of the training initiative. And this was really important because COVID hit March 2020, and we had about 2 or 3 months of pre-work already established. We had been talking to the BC Regional Council of Carpenters. We had been talking to the ITA. We had their support, and we just had to kind of massage it and figure out how it was going to work for the community and for BIRD. To pull those two groups together, our two groups together, we did a logo contest in the community, and the symbol is so important, and it's a tangible visual piece of material that really identifies the partnership. The artist's name is Sean Astor, and he captured this partnership with the individual, the person in the middle, who was holding a traditional tool and a modern tool. The adze is the traditional tool, and woodworkers are very predominant in the West Coast. We understand that the West Coast culture has a lot of carving, a lot of woodworking, and it's always been a universal occupation within the Indigenous communities on the West Coast. So having both tools represented in the logo was very important to us. To date, we have successfully completed 2 cohorts, as Evie mentioned, and graduated a total of 14 individuals from Kikatla Nation and the neighboring communities. Next slide, please. Some unique aspects of this program were the early planning and seeking to meet the community where they were, finding those synergies and between the project needs and the community members' interests in employment, understanding how many people are interested in employment, and We did a lot of open houses to gather interest in the program, as well as reach out to female participants to ensure that we found those female participants. I think we really thought outside of the box. Generally, government and labor unions, they have specific set programs, and I would say the BRCC and the ITA were very flexible with us, and they allowed us to really design the program around the community instead of trying to fit into their boxes. And having that flexible training model allowed us to be creative and meet the needs of the trainees while respecting the community needs. The industry participation and engagement throughout the process. We did a lot of community visits when we could. When COVID was a little less last summer, we managed to get out to the community and visit. We had site visits. We invited Chief and Council and the CLC to LNG Canada to see the project and understand where the students were going. We also targeted the training for the work that was going to be done on site. We used the forms that they would be using on site. Bird sent them to the training facility so that they would actually be using the materials and the tools that they would use on site. So when they got to site, they had confidence in using the tools that they would need to use. We also sent foremen from Bird to help train them during the last week when we did a special project, and they got to meet the leadership that they would be working under on site. So that developed the relationship so that transition was a little easier. Anything you'd like to add, Evie?
No, I think that's well, actually, yeah, a few things. So one of the results or a few of the results I'd like to add is when I was crunching numbers with the president of the BCRCC, we figured out between our two cohorts, the combined income by next October is going to be approximately $1.2 million. And that is huge for us because that's $1.2 million that stays here in the Northwest Coast. That's $1.2 million that goes towards buying boats or buying motors for boats so people can go food fishing and do traditional harvesting. So the results that were coming back, the projects that were donated to the community, like sheds for our loaf of bread project in La Clan, so they can hold their garbage during these coastal storms, and the smokehouses that were donated in Prince Rupert for community use. Those have huge impacts to the greater community. And so the results are really far-reaching. Even I'm hearing from parents of participants saying that the mental health outcome for the participants has just been amazing, to be able to be in a supportive program like this where they're getting not only support from the nation and from us in the employment department, but from the company and the government representatives. We're just seeing a lot of positive gains on our end.
Thank you, Evie. Next slide, please. So the goal is to have all graduates acquire 2 years of work experience within the LNG project at Kitimat to gain that practical carpentry skills on the job. The CLC is planning to host level 1 carpenter training in the fall of 2021. So all of these trainees will have the opportunity to be at a level 2 or a level 3 apprentice by fall 2022. These transferable skills have already rippled through the community, like Evie has said. They've built a shelter at the Gitlak Moon housing unit in Prince Rupert. So the shelter is comprised of a concrete wall and a kind of alcove concrete wall where we have a picnic table, and the road beside the housing unit is rather busy, so it protects like children and pets and people from the busy road. And all of the students have participated in building that wall in their community and given back to the community. The sheds, picnic tables, smokehouses, and many are already using their skills in their homes and getting requests from their families to help build decks and TV stands or fix things in their community. So there's already the results back in as on work and as well at home. Anything you'd like to add, Evie?
No, you got her covered.
Okay, perfect. So the next slide is a video, but it is 5 minutes, and I see we're really tight on time. So maybe we could just share the YouTube video in the chat and wrap it up. So next slide, please. I think. This is a picture of Chief Linda Innes and the first cohort of graduates outside the housing unit where the first piece of the concrete wall was built. So with that, we'd like to say thank you for your time, and any additional closing remarks from you, Abby?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. It was an honor to be here and speak to everyone, and we're willing to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Rebecca and Evie, for your presentation and sharing all that valuable knowledge about all those training programs and what that you're providing for these Indigenous peoples. Before we conclude, we do have a bit more time still left to answer any questions that any of you might have for any of our speakers today. You can either put them in the chat and let us know who you are addressing the question towards, and I can read them out loud. Or if you want to utilize the raise hand function on the bottom, if you click on that, we'll know who's clicking on it, and then we can have you unmute and ask your question out loud to whoever you want to address the question to. We did have one question that appeared during your portion, Rebecca and Evie, and I'm sure one of you will be able to answer it. But Janet asked, what advice would you give to guide a construction industrial company who is interested in developing a partnership with First Nations communities and educational partners? What would be the first steps in managing this? And then they see that there's a value for a continuous education center and for that.
Well, I would say the advice I would give is similar to a lot of what we've heard earlier in the call. Researching the community, learning about the community, reaching out to elders, understanding the community, approaching communities with respect, and not pushing your needs upon a community would be how I would approach starting a relationship. Just like any other relationships, they need to be two-way collaborations, and respect is always number one in any relationship. Anything to add, Evie?
No, I think Billy and yourself, you summarized it really nicely, is not, doing that oversweeping, like the Blackfoot are this way, so therefore Kikatla is going to be this way, but just being very respectful. And I think also when you're approaching the elders, to be careful, like Billy had mentioned that example, like doing it in a respectful way, and being careful about that gift giving. Yes, that's huge. I think the most important thing is just generally just being respectful is the key. If everyone eventually is going to make some sort of blunder or mistake, and I think as long as you're being respectful and people can sense that you're genuine, that's going to go a long way.
Thank you. And just to speak on what was written in the chat, we are sending out this recording to everyone that attended today. So if you want to ever look back on this presentation for anything that you might have missed or want to revisit it, it'll be provided to everyone. Does anyone else have any other questions that they would like to ask any of our speakers today?
Well, I think that is it, guys. I really appreciate everyone's time today. We broke 100 for our very first webinar, so I'm very grateful and honored to have each and every one of you join us today. And kudos to everyone that spoke, because you kept everybody online for the whole 100, broke over the 100 for the full hour. So good job. I just wanted to say thanks again, and I hope the webinar will have you better engaged and sustain Indigenous workforces moving forward. And I think everybody's information's on the side comments. So if anybody wants to have any other additional questions or concerns, you can email those parties directly. But again, thank you from us to you. We're a firm believer of partnerships and relationships, and that's the one thing that we're number one belief in our business and in our world here at Matrix. So just want to say thank you again for your time, and look forward to maybe doing this again in next quarter. Thank you.